Understanding how to work with functions is essential for any JavaScript developer. This video goes over the basics of functions with easy to understand examples to get you comfortable with the concept. Functions are one of the fundamental building blocks in JavaScript. A function in JavaScript is a block of code that performs a specific task and can be reused multiple times. They are an essential part of the language and are used to group together related code, create reusable code snippets, and structure larger programs. To use a function, it must be defined somewhere within the scope from which you wish to call it. A function definition, or sometimes referred to as a declaration or statement, consists of the function keyword followed by three things: the name of the function, a list of 0 or more parameters to the function enclosed in parentheses and separated by commas, and the code to be executed by the function enclosed in curly brackets. And here's a very simple example of a function named square. This function takes one parameter called number and consists of one statement that returns the parameter multiplied by itself. And we can see that once we console log the square of 2, of course the result is 4. Now, if the code within the function assigns a new value to the parameter, the change is not reflected globally or in the code that called the function. However, when you pass an object as a parameter, if the function changes the object's properties, that change is visible outside of the function. In this example, we have a function called increment age, which takes a person object and adds 1 to the age. And then we create a constant John Doe with the name John Doe and the age of 24. And then if we call the function with John Doe as a parameter, we can see that afterwards when we console log the age of John Doe, it results in 25, meaning that the object itself has changed. Similarly, if an array is passed as a parameter, any changes to the array's values will be visible outside of the function. This is because arrays are passed by reference in JavaScript, meaning that the function receives a reference to the original array rather than a copy of it. Now in this example, we have a function called doubleArray that takes an array and multiplies every array value by 2. So when we have a constant numbers set to the array 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we call doubleArray on that constant, we can see that after calling it and then console logging the constant, the array has changed to 2, 4, 6, 8. Next up is function expressions. A function expression is very similar to a function declaration, with a main difference being that the function name can be omitted in function expressions to create anonymous functions. We can create a function expression using the function constructor and a function declaration. Function expressions are convenient when passing a function as an argument to another function, such as a callback. I said function way too many times there. Let's take a look at an example. This is an anonymous function because there's no name after the function keyword. However, the entire function is saved to the getArea variable, so we can call the function through that. So we can see that the function just multiplies the width and the height that's given, and then the console log below is console log getArea 3 and 4, so multiply width times height, 3 times 4, result is 12. Alright, next up, arrow functions are another, more concise way to write function expressions. Arrow functions do not have this, arguments, super, or new.target, and are always anonymous. As an arrow function does not have its own this, the this value of the enclosing context is used. Here's a very straightforward example of an arrow function. We have constant square, and then we don't even have the function keyword. All we have is the parameter number, and then fat arrow, and then the function itself. However, as this function only has a single line of code, we can omit the curly brackets and the return keyword. Furthermore, since there is only a single parameter, we can also remove the parentheses around it. So now we can see our example has been simplified much further. And a quick tip, if we want to return an object literal expression, we simply need to wrap the function body in parentheses in addition to the curly brackets. So in this example, we have an arrow function that simply returns an object literal expression with the city of Toronto being the only property. So when we do console.log, call the function and then take the city property, our result will of course be Toronto. Next up, we have function hoisting. Consider the following example. We are console logging the square of 5, but the actual function of square is defined afterwards. Now this code runs without error despite the square function being called before it is declared. This is because the JavaScript interpreter hoists the entire function declaration to the top of the current scope. So the previous code is equivalent to this code. However, note that function hoisting only works with function declarations. It does not work with function expressions or arrow functions. Next up, let's briefly talk about function scope. Variables that are defined within a function are only accessible within the function and are not visible outside of it. This is because the variable is only defined within the scope of the function. On the other hand, a function can access all variables and functions that are defined within the same scope. In other words, a function defined in the global scope can access all variables defined in the global scope. Similarly, a function defined within another function can access all variables defined in the parent function, as well as any other variables that the parent function itself has access to. And with that segue, we have nested functions. In JavaScript, it is possible to define a function inside of another function. The inner function is only accessible within the outer function and is considered private to it. The inner function also forms a closure. A closure is an expression, usually a function, that has access to variables outside of its own scope, in addition to its own variables. Since a nested function is a closure, it can access the variables and arguments of the outer function. In other words, the inner function has access to the scope of the outer function. Alright, let's take a look at an example of a nested function. Here we have a function called outside, which takes parameter x, and then inside of there we have a function which takes parameter y called inside, and that function returns x plus y. So it takes the parameter of the outer and the inner function and just adds them together. And then we can see here below the inside function, we are returning inside. We are returning the actual function of inside. So with that, if we take a look at the first variable, we have constant inside fn or inside function, and it only provides one variable to the outside function. So here, this stores a function that basically adds 3 to whatever you give it. So next line, result 1, if we just pass 5 to inside fn, our previous variable, we can see that we get a result of 8. In other words, inside fn now holds a copy or instance of the outside function, with the x variable being hard-coded and set to 3. And then result 2 shows us that we can just skip this middle step and provide 2 separate variables to the outside function. So here we're doing outside, 3 in brackets, and then 5 in brackets, and that results in the same thing, 8. In JavaScript, function parameters default to undefined if no value is provided. However, in some situations, it might be useful to set a different default value. This is exactly what default parameters do. Let's take a look at this example. We have a function multiply which takes parameters a and b. However, b is set to be defaulted as 1. So if no b value is provided, no second parameter is given to the function call, b is set to 1 by default. And of course, we can see when we do multiply and call it with only 5, it returns 5 as b is set to 1. The rest parameter syntax allows us to represent an indefinite number of arguments as an array. In the following example, the function multiply uses rest parameters to collect all arguments excluding the first. So no matter how many arguments we pass the function call, the first one will be considered the multiplier and the rest will be considered args. And then we can see that the function returns a mapping of the args multiplied by the first parameter, which is the multiplier. So when we do multiply 2, 1, 2, 3, the first is used as the multiplier of 2, and then all the other ones are multiplied by that, so we get a return array of 2, 4, 6. And there we have it. In conclusion, functions are an important building block in JavaScript, allowing developers to group together related code and reuse it multiple times. We discussed various ways to create functions, what function hoisting is, the scope of a function, nested functions, and function parameters. I hope that this video has been helpful, as understanding how to work with functions is essential for any JavaScript developer. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, I'll catch you guys in the next video.